All right, we are going to get started here. This is a staff meeting of the Hamilton County Board of County Commissioners, March 4th, 2025. We've got a number of items on our agenda. The affordable housing update is number one. And before we get to that, let's introduce ourselves. Christy, just lean into the mic every time I forget to do it. And just remind me. So please introduce, starting from that end.
Christy Rischel, Assistant Clerk.
Leslie Hervey, Clerk to the Board.
Stephanie Summerall, Dumas Commissioner.
Hamilton County Commissioner Alicia Reese.
Jeff Aludo, County Administrator.
Patrick Dressing, Assistant Prosecuting Attorney.
I'm County Commissioner Denise Driehaus. So we've got affordable housing update. Luke Blocher is here from CDF, and he is going to give us this update. So please come forward, Luke, and we welcome your presentation.
Thank you very much, President Driehaus. And I want to note at first that our CEO and President, Joe Huber, who famously sang the national anthem at the State of the County, much to my surprise, he really wanted to be here today and sort of kick this off. Unfortunately, he has caught the bug that seems to be going around, so he is, which has delayed my appearance here for a couple weeks as well. But he sends his regards. I'm going to, as the President mentioned, this is an update, and I think I was here maybe in the end of the year and sort of said we were going to be releasing a 2-year impact report, which we did, and I was scheduled to be here probably a month ago, and as I mentioned, was sick. But this is a variation on a presentation we also gave at City Hall, which was, but this one's geared towards the city, or towards the county's involvement and role here and the impacts in the county. But just a big picture, this is a sort of, this program has been operating for 2 years. Here's sort of what's happened. Here's some things we've learned. It is, as has been our tradition, it is a fulsome, large PowerPoint. I will try to breeze through some of the stuff that's background material. You guys have it. You can look at it if you want to dig in further. And obviously, any questions you have, jump in any time, of course. With that, I will get started. Attempt to get started. Press power or anything like that? There we go. Okay. So we always start this off with who we are, but I think it is important just to remember that we are basically a nonprofit lender, real estate lender, and we really exist to help. I think as we've, over the 30 plus years of our existence, we've really come to exist to help our partners in the civic sector realize their policy goals, and particularly in the last few years, our government partners. Just again, reminder conceptually of what the Affordable Housing Leverage Fund is. And this is, I think a lot of you, we all are at ribbon cuttings, groundbreakings together a lot. And whenever I'm up there, I make this point, but it really is an innovative idea of the city and the county and many parties working together to maximize the coordination of affordable housing funding through a partner at CDF. And that really does have the effect of dramatically increasing the impacts. And it's done in a way that is sort of our approach at CDF, which is to really have long-term relationships with the people we work with, both our funders, but also probably the most importantly, the borrowers, and particularly the smaller borrowers who are trying to figure out how to get into this world. And I put this bullet up there, county as validator. I think it's really important to say this, that the county's investment in this idea through your ARPA program, and at the end of 2022 is when it actually became official, that really validated this concept. It was, the city had made an initial commitment that said we want to do this, and CDF had an idea that it could include a lot of other people, but it was the county's enormous commitment. It really validated the whole thing. And as I'll get into in showing the results, it was also the county's enormous commitment that allowed us to have so many impacts right away. A lot of the other funding came in over time. It's this county's money that came at the beginning, and that really allowed us to come out of the gate and solve a lot of problems, and most importantly, help create a lot of housing. So here is what I'll walk through today. And again, this is a county-focused version of a presentation we'd also given to the city. I will breeze through the timeline and background, but then I'll get into some of the impacts and some of the results against the strategy and some of the analysis of sort of what's happened. And also, most importantly, I think sort of what's coming next, we hope. There's 2 pages here of sort of a timeline of when funding has been committed by various parties. And the point of this is that over the 2-year period, and really starting back in when sort of CDF kicked this off way back in 2020, but really starting in the last 2 years, there's this steady drumbeat of the city, the county, private funders, and the federal government all contributing to this. And so we didn't have a press release every time something happened. We didn't make a big stink about it, but the point was things kept happening, and it's all because everybody agreed up front we're going to work together. And so we've got this 2-year timeline of consistent support. And I think that's a really important, honestly, thing for the public to understand, because again, none of us are really publicizing it that much, but the idea is there has been a consistent support from the governments and from the private sector to make this idea a reality. This is the page that sort of lists just the summary of the different sources in sort of big categories, the big different funders of this program. And again, you'll see the sort of single largest public supporter is the county, with ultimately now up to $36.4 million of the ARPA allocation. Just as a quick way of background reminder that in our contract that we executed with the county to administer this program, there were these 3 pots that were meant to be focused on: new housing, renovated rehab housing, and then the prioritized projects fund and the targeted populations of disabled residents, returning citizens, and seniors. And so that's been sort of the guidance that we've been following to again go execute against over these 2 years with the county funds. Another thing I want to call out here, and I think it's a really important part of the relationship, is this is another exciting excerpt from a big long legal contract. This is there was a sort of focus that we all wanted to have as well on smaller developers, smaller entities, helping more people get involved in development, to expand the pool of people who can do development, and also help build wealth and capacity amongst smaller developers and minority developers. But then there also was a very sort of, and this was sort of the point of the relationship with CDF in part 2, was to say, we want you to do this, we want you to be aggressive, but I think it is, it's hard to read, but it's sort of the last third of that bottom paragraph. It says, while still managing risk as required with deployment of federal funds. And that's sort of the thing that we've been trying to make sure we do, is we're going to be as aggressive as possible, but we're going to do it in the context of this bank lender approach, where we really take seriously our job to vet projects to make sure they're going to be successful, both for the county's public investment, but also, as importantly, for that developer. It doesn't serve anybody if an individual developer goes out, gets a bunch of sort of money up front, and then the project fails in 2 or 3 years, and they're stuck with a significant amount of debt and risk that could have long-term impacts on their business, but then also certainly them personally. And so that's we take that very seriously as sort of part of our job in vetting these projects. Just quickly, what we said when we first came here, and I think I came here in December of 22 and made a similar presentation, Joe and I did, about sort of what we were planning to do. We talked about focusing on immediate production of things that were gaps that were in the market because of rising construction costs. We talked about trying to grow what's a different kind of tax credit, the 4% market. We talked about really focusing on these disability, reentry, and senior homes. And then again, we talked very specifically in the contract, and we talked about it in our public presentation on focusing on smaller minority developers, focusing on smaller projects, focusing on geographic diversity, not simply only doing tax credit projects that really only the biggest developers can do, focusing on mixed income, and focusing on sort of innovation, essentially, with the new structures and products. This is a little bit of background that I think is just really important on what the world looked like when we started, because it really impacted what we ended up doing all collectively. When we started this in 2022, really the production of affordable housing was very dependent on this tax credit program, LIHTC. That is highly competitive, limited, and you can really only access it if you are a very well-established, well-capitalized developer. In fact, you can't even apply for LIHTC unless you previously won a LIHTC award. And so in order to apply, you have to go join up with somebody who's already gotten one in the past. So the point is, it's a very high barrier to entry, and we're not going to if we're only doing that, we're limiting what's going to happen with affordable housing development. And so, and as a result, there was a small pool of people who did this because it was such a barrier to entry. The other big thing we talk about a lot, but it just is a fact that can never go unsaid, is starting in basically when we got started in 2022, we started this historic cost escalation. According to stats that are up there from the Ohio Housing Finance Agency, from the applications they see for projects, basically, just in that world, costs went up 45% in 3 years. Now, rents didn't go up 45% in 3 years. Like nothing else went up 45% in 3 years. So the projects just got more and more and more underwater. And while that was happening, also like all the federal and state sources that would ordinarily help with that stuff didn't go up 45%. They stayed flat. So you just had this increasing problem that really only was solvable by the fact that you all had committed to this program. If this didn't exist, these projects would have died. And then there was also, this is a little bit technical, but it's important. There were the Ohio Housing Finance Agency has these rules they publish every 2 years, which is basically like how they're going to ask, who can get this tax credit, what are the rules going to be? And they made some changes in those that really had a negative effect on projects in Hamilton County for a variety of reasons that we can talk about if desired, but it made LIHTC even less available than it had been before in some meaningful ways. And so we really had to figure out other ways to do this. The response that we had most importantly was to really be focus on gap financing right away to help these projects happen that couldn't happen. And I underlined this and bolded parts of it because it's really important. Like what we did and the results we're going to show were only possible. The whole program was everyone coming together. But what happened, and especially that first year, was only possible because the county had upfront committed all these funds. And so were it not for the commitment you all made, we would have done some good work, but it would have been nowhere near the scale that we are at today. And that allowed us to focus those county ARPA funds at a sort of like year one. And then later, when city funds, other funds came in, we could still do the stuff with those funds at that time. And so it's hard to overstate how important it was, the county's commitment at the front right away. We've also been working very closely with the Ohio Housing Finance Agency to create a process where we can make what we're calling conditional commitments to projects that maximize the chance, trying to get at that problem of getting these competitive state awards. We've worked directly with OFA to get them to agree to a process where we can make conditional commitments, and that will maximize the sort of point scoring for these projects, which ultimately maximizes the ability to get these LIHTCs, which is the biggest pot of money we can access to help support these things. And then the other thing we really focused on is what we talked about a little at the beginning, is really building capacity amongst the non-LIHTC, non-tax credit developers. That includes smaller developers, but also market rate developers who hadn't done affordable housing before. And in a sort of twist of fate a little bit, the fact that it was so hard to develop any real estate the last 2 years because the costs were so much, we had a lot of people who came to work with us because we had money. And so we got a bunch of projects that wouldn't have been affordable housing in under a year before, 2 years before, that became affordable housing. Now that helps we got more numbers, but now also that is a group of developers who all of a sudden have done affordable housing and are comfortable with it and aren't scared by it. And that's a huge sort of capacity building for the future. If we're talking about really meaningfully moving the needle on lots of numbers. This is, we have a one-page summary of the last 2 years that's sort of the summary of the impacts, and we've published that on our website, and we had a press release with it a couple months ago, and the county and the city were part of that press release. So this is an excerpt from that larger piece, just so you know that there's a larger one-page you all to have for your own reference. But these are the big top-line 2-year impact numbers. And this was a repeat of what we did after year one. And we took that time period of September to September as sort of like really when we really started the program. So in the 2 years since we actually in September 22 is when we actually had access to the city funding for the first time. So that's when we really started having the ability to influence projects. But over that 2 years, you see there's a number there, and I think they're pretty significant. If you look at all the different investments together, all the different sources we pulled together, we actually committed close to $75 million to projects. 54 different projects, which resulted in commitments to build or preserve 1,803 income-restricted units, meaning units that have a affordability restriction on them. To illustrate sort of how the program works, again, is 54 projects, so it's actually 92 different investments. So sometimes on a project, we are supporting it in multiple ways, sometimes with a public grant dollars, sometimes with a loan that we're making to the project. always making sure that those things are working together to maximize the impacts and benefits. And then a couple of the other stats on there that I think are important is that we have really focused on the, lower AMI, area median income levels. 85% of all the income restricted units are below 60%. And then there has been, and really this is only because the county's funds supported it, we do have single family homes that are being supported as well. And then it's always an important point to say there is a very significant leveraging here. So this is, pretty basic point, but I think it's really important. These funds are not paying 100% for a project. They are leveraging this other private investment or other investment from other sources. And so when you think about the total project cost that those 54 projects represent, which is close to $500 million, you have 13-to-1 leverage of what the actual public investment in those direct public investment in those projects is. This is just an illustration of the idea of like multiple things are working together, right? So then you have the biggest piece of that pie is actually essentially private money CDF is raised, either from private sources or the federal government, or it's our own operating money that we put into these, our own sort of like revenues we've generated over the years from our operations. And then you have the county ARPA and the city trust fund and city ARPA commitments in there as well. And the point of that is, this shows graphically everybody working together and how this all is a sort of much bigger impact together. This is a little bit of a breakdown of the AMI levels of the projects. Again, it shows you that you're further down, you're getting much further on the 60% below, but you're even getting a significant amount of numbers at the 50% and even 30% AMI and below with these projects, which is something that is a big part of, I think, was a goal that you all set for us, was to have a distribution of these AMI levels. And we've been able to do that these last 2 years. This is an important point too, I think. Again, this program working together, the county's money being leveraged. So there are 25 projects that we funded directly with county ARPA dollars. There's actually one included in here that came after this strict September deadline, but it's an exciting one. I'll talk a little bit about later. But there's 25 projects in those 848 units, which is great, which already exceeds what was in the contract proposal, which I think was 700 units or 750 to be produced in the 4 years. But then, because you're part of this program, there were 20 other projects that happened in Hamilton County with 879 units that were funded by some other source. And so, again, you're sort of realizing these cumulative benefits by working together. It's kind of small here, but you guys have it listed. These are all the individual projects that have been funded directly by the county ARPA dollars. And actually, the one that I mentioned is sort of it was closed just past the deadline, was this the very last one there, the SJW UC Red Brick House, which is specifically a house for a project for disabled residents in Delhi Township. And that is a really great example of like this whole thing working, because that is not a regular big developer. It is someone who had a passion for wanting to do this, who saw that the county had committed funding to disabled residents housing, came to us, applied initially in the initial RFP we had way back in 2023, but like they weren't really ready. So we worked with them for the next year to like get ready, to figure out a way to sort of support the project. And then they are now going forward with this in a way that would have never in a million years happened had the county not made this commitment, specifically called out disabled residents for housing. Here's a breakdown of I had the breakdown earlier of the AMI levels for the whole program. Here's a breakdown just as it relates to those projects that receive county funding. Again, you can sort of dig into this further if you'd like. Here's we've done this previously. Here's a sort of distribution map showing the different projects, where they are located within the county. We are absolutely, and we'll talk about it, I mean, there is a continued priority to get more of these outside of that city of Cincinnati limit. I think it's worth mentioning, we talked about this idea that we've tried to really be innovative in addition to doing the basic blocking and tackling of just filling someone's gap. And one of the ways is really focusing on how do we get more light tech credits out of the state, or how do we get more funding out of the state, just period. And we've got a lot of promising ways that are happening with that. And I'm really excited to say that I think this is all working. We started a partnership directly with the city to do this, but we are starting a conversation with the county administration about how to do this as well, and even how to truly coordinate amongst county, city, and CDF to make sure that essentially we're maximizing the possibilities for people applying for competitive dollars, and we're sort of like maximizing the efficiency of each one of those three parties' investments. So like the decisions can be made in coordination, not in isolation, and that is a really big. That's something that seems like it'd be easy, but actually it's just never the way it's been done. I think there's some real exciting opportunities there. I get up here and show a lot of numbers and words. There has been some good press coverage of sort of this report and this impacts that I think is worth highlighting. And I think really what all three of these are as examples of articles at the Courier and WVXU and Channel 12 is essentially the media's reaction is, this is working. This seems like a good idea. Good job, everybody. And we don't always get that type of simple approval, but that's what, and I say we, all of us, everyone engaged in this work. But I think that it's sort of undeniable this has been successful and it's a good program, and that's really, again, because of the commitments that have been made, the smart commitments that were made by the county at the very beginning as a validator of this whole thing. Another big piece of impacts is sort of the people. One of the things that we want to get better at, CDF, to be quite honest, is this is about some of the developers. We want to get more into the actual people who are living in these homes, who are benefiting from living in these homes, and figuring out the right way, the appropriate way to tell their stories. But these are some quotes that I think are indicative of the sort of way this is being received by the people who need it, work with it. And some of you were at this really wonderful groundbreaking for Kai Luar's project in Lower Price Hill. And you'll remember he got really wonderfully emotional about talking about sort of how important this project was, and I will tell you that the county's investment is what made it possible in many ways. And also I will tell you that CDF has been working with him on that project and a few others for probably 5 years. And it's something that is incredibly important to us as well. Like, it's why we do this work. You have a quote there from Michael Tuning of 8K in the Courier, essentially saying these projects wouldn't be possible without CDF and the larger program here. And Ben Eilerman from OTRCH talking on WVXU a few weeks ago, again saying this program, this funding by the county and the city is what makes these projects possible. Full stop. I say this just because I think we are very mindful. This is a process summary, but we're very mindful of the fact that we are administering public dollars. We want to be very transparent with the public about what we are doing and how we operate. And this is a sort of description and a summary of the way we have sort of worked to deploy these funds on behalf of the county over these last 2 years. And the fundamental approach at the top is to say we really balance relationship lending, and by that I mean we meet with people like with Kai, over many years, and we work with them to figure out how to make their project work, but we also have transparent, formal processes. So it's not just the people who know us who can access these funds. And I sort of list all the different ways there that we have programmatically that we sort of do this. One of the things I want to underline is that last bullet, and I just think this is, if there's one process thing you can take away, and process is boring, but if there's one process thing I want you all to take away, it's that the fundamental sort of reason this works, the fundamental mechanical thing, the function that we provide is when we have a dedicated pool of funding, we can build a pipeline of projects. We can go out to people and say, if you come to us, we will be here, and this is the type of thing we would be willing to support. And building and managing that pipeline is really what the job is. It's actually, like, it's highly complicated. These things take a long time, but when you really boil it down, that is what's happening here. And that is something that you just have to commit to over years. When you do commit to it over years, you can see a lot of results. going back to what we said against the strategy, I'm just going to quickly run through some of what we've done against that. So, this is back what I said in this is back when I showed up. I said, here's what we're going to focus on. I talked about earlier in the presentation. Filling gaps caused by rising construction costs. That's pretty much everything we're doing is sort of responding to that reality. We did want to grow specifically the 4% LIHTC market, which is a different tax credit. It's a little more available, but it's not as big of a subsidy. There were 4 different 50-unit projects that really we were able to help make happen by working with them over time. They were projects all that came in, asked for money. It was too much. The gap was too much, but we worked with them to get use our funds to leverage other sources, and then got them across the finish line. That was an intentional effort. But the construction cost gaps of the 4% remain a big challenge. We did, so on the work on the Prioritized Projects Fund, you all were here for a wonderful event we had with LAD back at the end of last summer, maybe beginning of the fall, on the sort of dramatic expansion of their programming and their smart homes project. I want to, say that it has and continues to be a deep partnership. We are meeting with them every week, talking through how to do this together, because what we collectively ask them to do is really get out of their comfort zone, like go far beyond what they'd ever done before, and say, we have these funding, we want to strike, and we want to make a big impact and create a model. And they have taken up that challenge. But that has been it continues to be a lot of mutual work together and really a partnership with LAD. And then this wonderful thing, of the SWJ Red Brick House as a smaller example of that coming out of this. And that's the type of thing that happens when you set targets and then go out to the market and say, this is the kind of thing we're willing to support. And, those are just, it's straightforward, but those, if you all hadn't said we want disability housing, those things wouldn't have happened, like full stop. There's no real other possibility. In the senior target, we've had 3 different projects come through that have 187 units. That's 21% of the total units funded by the county funds. That continues to be an area we're having a lot. There are several other projects in the pipeline that are targeted towards senior housing. That actually continues to be a thing that the state wants to support, and so there's a little more opportunity there. And then in the reentry housing from the original 3 target areas, we have done a lot of work over time with Trina Jackson in the Office of Reentry and her team, and also many of the people that they work with, the current landlords they work with, to try to figure out, and this is, I think I have a little bit later slide on this, but these three categories, and really there's a sort of established way to develop senior housing, so don't put that in this category. But these other 3 categories, disabled, reentry, and now tiny homes. For everything else we're doing through this program with the county's funds and also with the other funds, there's sort of a normal way of development processes where we can say, okay, you're going to go develop a project, you're going to show us where there's a gap, we're going to figure out how to help fill that gap. But it comes after a complete project analysis. Like, here's our total operating budget over the next 15 years. Here's all the other financing we put in place. And we are able to say, okay, yep, this aligns with all of our sort of like due diligence and understanding of the market and sort of what will work. And so we know we've done our underwriting and analysis, and you've sort of put all the pieces together. We know that if we put this last piece of the puzzle together, we have a reasonable confidence it's going to work because it's sort of aligned with other things we've seen. For disabled housing, reentry housing, and tiny homes, it can't really work that way. It has to sort of work in reverse, where we say, okay, we want to give you some catalytic investment at the beginning, and we need to figure out how to do that and then still get you to the point where we know the project's going to work. And there's a lot more ways to describe that, but it just is an inverse of the normal process. And so, and you're working with, you don't have, oh, this is how you do reentry housing. Let me just pull up the model off the shelf and do it. Or quite frankly, at the scale that Lad was talking about, disability housing, independent disability housing. And so we have had to do, and this is the work, and this is why we're partnering with the county. There's a lot more sort of front end work and ongoing work with the projects to try to get them across that finish line. It's a much more longer, more robust process than with the sort of traditional development projects. So we've been working with Trina, to really understand what is it that the Office of Reentry needs. You know, what types of housing, how many units, what's their client list look like? What are the types of structures we want to look toward? I think after a lot of that work, we got to feeling more like a, both from a project size and also sort of the scale of sort of focused reentry housing. We'd want to be in the more like 4 to 8 unit building range as opposed to the 40 unit building range, which is both wildly expensive, but also would sort of introduce an element of concentration that I think was not the desired outcome. And so right now we're working through that, and we're working with, we've had conversations with basically 5 different possible projects, and we're sort of working through how to make those work right now and how to figure out how to potentially involve some level of CDF debt to go along with the ARPA dollars that will make the project work, will make the project set up for success, but also won't, and I think will do what, going back to what the sort of contract terms call for appropriately, is we're managing risk for federal dollars in a way that's responsible. So we are in the middle of that right now. It is a big focus of ours to sort of get a few of these over the finish line, and that progress is in work on the reentry side. On the tiny homes, I really just put that we're in diligence stage there, but we are having a lot of really, honestly, like exciting meetings right now with the different groups that have been pursuing this. We just had a wonderful meeting with Earl Crossland yesterday, who's from he's renamed it the Tiny Homes, the Tiny Homes Initiative, I think is what he calls it, but I think he is someone who is, has put a lot of thought into a really interesting idea around 25 unit village concept that has some mirrors in what's been done in St. Louis. There's a couple other, the group called Warrior Homestead that we've also met with and sort of talked through. We've talked a lot with Kevin Finn at Strategies and Homelessness around how they've been looking at things. And what I think we're excited to do is 2 things. One, potentially have a project to recommend for funding out of this, but at a minimum, also have essentially like a guidebook that we can all have, which says, here are some of the things that we're going to have to solve for if we want this to work. One of them that is very elemental is building codes and zoning codes. There are examples of tiny homes around the country that are being used that do not satisfy the building codes in Ohio, in Hamilton County, and Cincinnati. So those would have to either be changed, or you'd have to figure out some way to address that. But they don't meet what we have decided as a state and city and county as sort of like the basic minimum levels for a living unit. Either they don't have plumbing, maybe permanent plumbing, or they don't have enough square footage. I think 253 square feet is like the minimum space allowed for a living unit. Or there's some other element that sort of doesn't meet that, satisfies the sort of what someone has determined works for a tiny home and doesn't satisfy the building codes in our state. And then there are issues around the zoning codes, whether they do or don't allow different versions of this in different parts of the city and county. So the other element that we're engaged with too is actually meeting with the people at the city zoning department to really talk through this example, and like, let's just not doing that not as a developer coming in asking for approval, but as sort of a partner of theirs saying, hey, is there a way to work through this? Like, when this comes, like, here's what it might look like. I'm excited that there could be some guidance that whether we come out of this review period and have one project to fund or not directly, we have sort of guidance that other people can pick up and like try to think through and come up with projects that could help take advantage of it. And that we as a community can say, maybe there's some things we want to change to try to allow this that are preventing it. So that work is happening right now and really live right now. We have a bunch of meetings coming up in the next 2 weeks with several groups who have been exploring this as well. Again, back to the sort of results against strategy, we've been focused on encouraging smaller and minority developers, as we discussed. Of the 54 projects we mentioned, 12 are by 8 different small or early stage for-profit developers. So that's around the groups who are trying to like grow and build wealth. 6 of those projects there's not a one-to-one there, but there are 6 projects by 5 different Black or female-owned development companies. And then, a significant number of these are nonprofit or government developers, and 29 of the 54 projects. we have, I think, succeeded in not exclusively focusing on LIHTC. If we did, our numbers wouldn't be anywhere near where they are. And then we've also had this real focus on these smaller projects, which I think is, on the one hand, if you just want to juice numbers, you just do the biggest projects possible. But I think if we're talking about really building capacity and having a variety of living options throughout the county that are affordable, like these smaller projects are really important. And so 16 projects of 15 units or less is a really good chunk of this. Again, the geographic diversity, there's more. We need to sort of keep pushing this, but there are projects in 9 different jurisdictions in 16 city neighborhoods. We have succeeded with some interesting mixed income projects. One of the things that I want to note here, though, is that we had the scenario multiple times where the project wanted to be mixed income. That was their goal. And it just couldn't work. They needed the subsidy that came with having it be 100% affordable for the project to work. And so they went essentially 100% affordable, which is, I think, good in the long run, but that's probably not, or it's good right now in the short run, but I think in the long run, we want to be able to have those mixed income projects work. And we have pursued a lot of different products, but I do want to keep us all in mind that these high costs have not sort of really abated, and the gaps have existed, and they have to be funded by these public funds, or else they're not going to be filled at all. Just to give you a snapshot, and this is a snapshot from a couple months ago, but of those 54 projects, it's a good reminder that the development process is not a overnight one. So the 2 years of making commitments to projects, 17 of them have been finished, actually, for 577 units. 20 of them are under construction with another 557 units, and then there's the last 17, they're sort of pending the beginning of construction with 773 units. And there's a little bit of, those numbers would be updated if we took that snapshot today. And then similarly, some of the projects haven't actually closed financially, but they're all in the process of closing, and there's a couple more that have closed since I put these numbers together. Just some stats for reference to have later, but the actual sort of subsidy per unit is around $26,000 for both ARPA as a source and the City Trust Fund as a source. It's important as we think about the global address, the global sort of policies around development in the county. Even when we're subsidizing this, there's oftentimes other subsidy involved, like the port having to forgive the value of the land entirely, which then eats into their capacity, because that's money they were projecting to actually realize from a sale. But oftentimes make these projects work, the port or the city is giving up the land for free. And so it's just important to keep in mind that these gaps remain big, and there's just no way around it. And when we're making a loan instead of a subsidy, it's around $800,000 as an average loan amount. Just to give you a picture of like what we're also doing in conjunction with the public subsidies. And the point of this, without getting into too much detail, is to just say, and these just came out of some city stats that were easily available. One, the first 2 bullets really show the dramatic increase in production and affordable housing from these last 2 years from the previous 5 years in the city. And then the second is showing that, there was a slowdown of development happening everywhere because of all these issues that I've been describing. And so that we were able to succeed in getting, and this is just in the city context, 1,531 units those were units, not all those were income restricted, but total units that were funded through the program. That was over half of the total housing units that were added in according to the city's dashboard. There's probably a little bit of apples to oranges in like how those are counted, but that is a pretty good order of magnitude sense of like, there was not a lot else happening because of all these problems. And both, it was really good that we were doing this, and also, almost in spite of all that, we were able to have, these projects were able to come to fruition. A couple takeaways that I just think are really important is, you all consider going forward and the future of this program, but also your policy choices in general. The headwinds that we're facing in development are real. They really haven't abated. And some recently, like insurance, have gone up even more recently. These state and federal sources have stayed flat, which meant that, if the local people aren't doing it, it's not happening. Fortunately, I think there's just no way to get around the fact that tariffs are going to add cost and significant uncertainty in the near term. And then it's an enormous question that everybody in this industry, and I know you all know, and you're dealing with different organizations in town that are confronting this sort of, in some sense, existential concern about what happens at the federal level. But that is going to have, however that gets resolved, is going to have impacts. And until it gets resolved, there's going to be a lot of uncertainty in the market about HUD has an enormous role to play in everything that happens in housing. The CDFI fund is where we get other funding from the federal government. Low-income housing tax credit, all these things seem to be up in the air, and I think we have to acknowledge that's going to cause some churn and uncertainty for people looking to invest right now. And so, a lot of these things contribute to the fact that there's just no way around the public subsidy need is there when you're talking about affordable housing development. It always will be. But I think, I continue to believe that there is a real opportunity if we continue this idea of coordinating to really have impact in spite of those challenges. And that's what, gets us really excited every day. A takeaway from the last 2 years is, and this is something that is not rocket science, but I just think it's worth saying, is when you can have certainty, dependability, and flexibility in the way you can work with the folks who need to access these funds to build housing, that can go a long way. And the longer you have that in place, the bigger the impact you're going to have, because it's a multi-year cycle from people developing housing. They're looking at stuff. They're looking at decisions they're making now that they're going to have to, about whether to make the first step of investment that are not going to come into fruition for a year or two later, oftentimes. And then the last bullet there on the difference between affordable and market rate industries, I just want to keep harping on that a little bit, because it's not, we need to really keep at it to get the market rate developers to do more affordable housing, because it's out of their comfort zone. Verifying the incomes of the tenant, every tenant that they have to tenant, sort of doing the compliance reporting that they had never had to do. Like, all those things are like not in their normal operations. And I think we need to keep at, we've had some success with this, but we need to keep at sort of working on getting those folks to be part of the affordable development world, because they really are different worlds. And we've talked about the heightened risk at the federal level, but when I participate in conversations around the country, basically the thing that I keep hearing is, if you don't have a local funding source, like, nothing's happening, because that just is a basic requirement. We talked earlier about the difference between catalytic funding for a project that really needs a lot more leadway versus the traditional gap financing. And then again, I say this, but it really is important, and I think it's actually like quite simple, but it encapsulates a really important fundamental element of this, which is pipeline development is like the thing you're trying to get. You're trying to get a bunch of people to do the legwork, to start committing to projects, and then be able to manage that through to completion, and having the consistency and the dependability to make sure that's happening. Because you can say I got a big funding source, but if there's no pipeline of projects, it just sits there. And the reason that we've been able to deploy these funds so aggressively is we've been building and managing a pipeline. A big picture takeaway, and I couldn't not say this here, but I appreciate, Commissioner Driehaus, your statements at the state of the county. We've been saying this a lot over time. Number one, the county's commitment at the front of this process was the difference maker for the scale of what's been produced. Full stop. I think the city has made significant commitments on an ongoing basis, but they were over time in smaller chunks, and that meant we had to sort of wait for those. And if we had to just wait for those, it would have been a different picture than what we were able to come out of the gate and fund a lot of projects right away, and then backfill those with the city, backfill other opportunities with the city money when it came in. So the scale is a product of this commitment you all made. But of course, these are one-time funds, and part of the challenge that I've talked a few times about here is there was a huge pipeline and a decades of practice of pursuing affordable housing in the city. There's less of that out in the non-city jurisdictions, and we have to build that pipeline over many years for it to happen. And there needs to be an understanding that there will be a partnership and sources available over many years. And so I think that to sort of continue this pace overall as a program, and especially if we want to do more in the county, there has to be a long-term funding source. And then I think this is the last bullet, just to quickly summarize sort of how we've approached this. And there's been sort of in phases. We focused on immediate production right away to deal with the cost issues. We then shifted into continuing to do that, but also really focusing on leveraging new money, getting money out of the state. And then now, the third phase that we're in right now, I would characterize as both secure, giving some long-term permanent public revenue streams to keep this model going, but also really pushing harder. And we did a lot in the first 2 years, but really pushing harder on a lot more patient private capital, really pushing on the local corporate philanthropic community to also sort of participate in the long term through this. And then to try to do these various different things are listed there as we grow and evolve the program. That's all. I really appreciate it. I'm sure I went a lot longer than I intended to, but I don't know how to not do it. So thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thanks for coming in. Thanks for the update. I've got a couple of questions. I'm only going to ask a couple and then kick it to my colleagues because I think there will be some redundancy here of questions. So when you talk about the number of units that have come online because of the investment of, as you say, the county, the city, the private sector, the state, federal funds, and with the coordination of CDF, it reminds us of the enormity of the issue.
Yeah.
Because if we need 30 to 40,000 units, and this has produced some of that, but a fairly small number compared to 30 to 40,000, it really is a sobering reminder about how much work there is to be done here. But I'm gratified that we've taken the first step to get this off the ground in a different kind of look for the county and than what we've been able to do in the past, primarily through ARPA, as you say, thanks to the Biden-Harris administration. I just want to highlight a couple of things. You said this, I've heard this too, the validation of having government in first and then the business community follows is something that I've been told about, challenged by, and so you validated that in your comments, and I appreciate that. I saw the private sector funding. We might want to get more aggressive on that side because I suspect that there is more availability of funding on the private side. Happy to help. I think we all have connections within the business community that we might be able to utilize to produce a bigger pot of money there. I also wanted to highlight what's being done outside the city because that was one of the challenges. And as you say, the infrastructure is not really there. Like it is in the city, it's not as robust. And so continuing to do that work outside the city is going to be really important to county commissioners. But my question for you, and I've been in a number of different spaces I just got back from a national conference and the Ohio conferences, all this talk about housing, whether you're rural or urban doesn't really matter. Everybody needs more housing, particularly in Ohio with some of the developments going on in the central part of the state. So we always talk about these strategies about what we can do as elected officials to produce more housing or be part of the answer to how do we get more housing. So money is always part of it. And we're looking for the state and the feds to also kick in by way of funding because in the end, we need more funding. But you also mentioned this, and I've also heard about zoning codes, about building codes, about available property. And so I would, not today because we have gone a little long, but I would be very interested in having you give your top 10 or your top 5 bullet points as to what strategies policymakers could employ to be part of the solution by way of housing. Because I hear in other parts of the state, especially, zoning and codes are really important. I think we have focused a lot on the funding, which I think is appropriate. But I'd be curious to know in the future what strategies you think, beyond just funding, we could employ to provide for more housing, particularly outside the city of Cincinnati limits. So I'm not going to go on with other questions. Again, I know there's going to be a lot of overlap between the county commissioners here, so I'm going to leave it there. But that I think is ongoing. We've asked the administrator to look at an available ongoing funding source. It will not be to the tune that we were able to do during ARPA, obviously, because that was a significant amount, but something that's sustainable, as you say, to show our commitment, but also to leverage other dollars into this fund when they know that the county and the city are doing ongoing funding for affordable housing in our community. So I just want to leave it there. We've talked a little bit offline about some of these things, but again, thanks for the presentation, and I'll look forward to getting your recommendations about what more we can do outside of just funding.
I really appreciate that. It's an important element of it, no question.
Thank you. Commissioner Summer Dumas.
Thank you. I just got your packet. It's about 35 pages. I'm very analytical, and there's a lot of statistics in here, and I would like to have had the opportunity to review this so I could really ask the questions that need to be asked, and I'm not able to do that. So maybe once I take it back, I can send you an email as it relates to that. I remember when you came to us about 2 years ago about this concept, and the first thing I said was, what about outside of the city? And I hear Commissioner Driehaus talking about that you're looking at that, you're talking about that, but I still have yet to see it. And so I know it's not a great impetus to do that because I'm going to focus on page 26, which is about your strategy. For disabled residents, you have 2 projects, 40 units, and the seniors, you have 3 projects, 178 units. My concern, well, several concerns. Under reentry, you say you need to establish guidelines and target needs. And so when I talked to Trina Jackson, she's very clear on what she needs, what they need, what her population needs. And I know you were saying earlier that the model for reentry and tiny homes is not as easy as the other model. So I'm thinking in my head that we are paying your organization to determine the model to follow through on reentry and tiny homes. It's not up to her to decide, you said maybe 4 units instead of 40 units, but I'm dependent on you to make it clear. When we look at reentry and how many projects we've done, 0. We look at tiny homes, you say we're in due diligence stage. How long? I mean, how long are we going to be in due diligence stage? Time is of the essence. We're trying to do this for veterans and the homeless. So how long is due diligence? I mean, I would love to look at this and see we have 1 building for reentry and we have 1 for tiny homes. It's just my priority, and I think the board agrees, I can't speak for them. And that's why we made reentry and tiny homes important. And I've yet to see it. And I know that tiny homes and reentry homes do not generate revenue like those apartments and those units, but it does meet the needs of our people in Hamilton County. So I'm just, I don't know if you're gonna come back for more money or what. I'm not willing to do that until we see 1 project for some veterans or the homeless. I see all those other units, and that's good. I'm aware that we're not going to generate money by doing that, but we need it. It's a priority. So bottom line for me is getting more buildings or structure outside of Cincinnati, and the bottom line is reentry and tiny homes. So can you tell me, tiny homes are everywhere. So I don't get it. We have land everywhere. I mentioned to Port Authority about the old Swifton Commons. That's completely empty, and she mentioned that maybe part of it could be tiny homes. I don't know. We need to stop talking and do it. We've done these. Why have we not put up 1 project for tiny homes? Can I?
Yeah, so I appreciate that very much, and I think I just want to absolutely acknowledge we want to follow the priorities that you all have. Full stop. Tiny homes was not part of the original focus of this program. So this was at the end of 2024. You all had some additional ARPA money that had not been allocated. You wanted to allocate it over to this larger program and have within that a focus on tiny homes. So that was at the end of 2024 when that happened. And then we said we want to work on how to make that happen. What are the issues that have prevented it to date? And how can we make it happen? So that's when we are, from a timing perspective, that work has really just started. So it's the beginning of March. We didn't That wasn't a request from the county till the end of December of 2024. So we have been in the beginning of that work. And I think we are doing sort of, I think the point of that work right now is to talk to people who have been trying to do it and say, why hasn't it worked? Like, what has been the holdup? And are there ways that we can address that both with money, but also with figuring out some of the other issues? Because as we've understood it, some of the blocking from tiny homes has been issues like the zoning code and the building code, but also there has been neighborhood opposition to the idea in places. And so we are trying to figure out how to identify what has been blocking these things, and how can funding and then also explaining the issues help make it happen.
So, and you're correct, it was at the end of 24. Now, reentry was not.
Yeah.
That was part of the initial. So where are we on that?
So this is something that we are spending a significant amount of time on and working directly with individual sort of projects to try to make happen. I tried to sort of explain this a little bit. The issue is not that these projects don't make money. It's that the sort of proposals that we've been looking for and trying to navigate, and I think we're going to get some of them across the finish line. But whereas every other project that we talked about, we were able to sort of go through a process where you can, before you actually commit the public dollars, you have a fuller sense of it's going to look like, and you have a sense of, okay, we can be certain this is going to work for the person who's taking this on, as opposed to providing the funds to buy something and then not knowing yet until the purchase happens what it's going to look like. We're trying to figure out how to solve for that problem right now.
Is there urgency to make it happen? I haven't heard the urgency to make the reentry.
Yeah, it is urgent for us. I would say of the things we've spent the most actual time on, reentry and disability housing we spent more time on those.
So are we having meetings about it, or? I mean, we have to have meetings to get a structure and get a strategy and all that. But
I think this is one of
when do you propose to see a project for reentry? Can you give me a date or projected date or?
We just yesterday had a meeting. I know our team had a meeting with one of the potential projects. We're working through how this might work. We are prioritizing it, and we will prioritize it absolutely. And I am taking away from this, not that we didn't already have this priority, but we're going to push to make something happen as soon as we possibly can.
So has your agency been out to places where it's a possibility of building a reentry home or a tiny home? I hear what you're saying about sometimes the community does not want it, but have you proposed a specific area where we could possibly build outside of the city? We're really not even outside the city for this. We just need a project for reentry.
So the way that we operate and the way that sort of what we have been asked to do is to work with the people who are building or owning or managing the housing, right? We're not building it or managing it ourselves. That's not what we do. But what we do is work with those folks and try to help make it work for them. And so we are working with those folks right now and and what we are really trying to solve for right now is this challenge of how do we help a smaller project, a smaller landlord, take this on quickly and make sure it's going to be successful for them.
How long does it take to make that decision? You guys have, I'm sure, and I keep bringing up Trina, I hate to do that because I'm not here speaking in her behalf, but I've talked to her and she knows what they need and what the people that are coming out need. How long do you meet about that? But start moving on it.
It's hard, I do appreciate what you were saying, Commissioner Dumas, and I genuinely, truly do. And I don't want to I don't want to sort of bore and get into some long development process discussion.
Yeah, I don't need that either.
So what I can say to you is this is a priority. We understand it to be a priority. We are trying to sort of balance the various directives that are in our contract with the county to make sure we're delivering on what you all have asked for. in stewarding these federal funds, and we remain committed to that. And I also take very, I didn't, sorry to interrupt you, I take very seriously, truly very seriously what you were saying, as well as with regards to projects outside the city. We have several relatively larger scale projects outside the city right now. We're sort of going through the process with that. I'm optimistic are going to be able to push forward. We have explicitly sort of said we're not going to fund projects inside the city anymore, because you all said this the last time we're here, and we've taken that to heart. So we're not using these funds for city projects until maybe ever, but definitely until we get more of these county projects happening. So I'm optimistic about those right now as well.
And as we all know, time is of the essence as it relates to federal funding, and also for the people that are waiting to utilize this facility. So that's all I have.
I do appreciate that.
Thank you. Commissioner Reese?
Thank you very much. One of the things that I wanted to note in terms of our board, we're up to about $60 million total in ARPA money for affordable housing projects, and that's nothing to sneeze at. We also have HUD dollars that we've used as well. One of the things that I have been asking for, and I'm hoping that it's almost ready to go, is an interactive mapping system so that we can see a total picture of affordable housing, whether it's through CDF, whether it's through HUD, whether it's through other entities, so that you can go to our website and each of us can go there and find out in real time as these projects are going online, how many units, those kind of things as it is moving. So hopefully, I think Mr. Ludo will maybe talk to that, where we are with that. In addition, I will have to say that the funding that we provided allowed for projects that were stalled and would never have gone online to get moving quickly. So we had a right now program plus a long-term investment type of program. I do want to share in some of the comments that was made earlier about tiny homes. Certainly, I know that was added, but I would recommend possibly looking at what Columbus has just done, and also Easter Seals, who I was at their opening of their Veterans Center, and I understand they're working on some housing for veterans, and I believe it's in Walnut Hills. So I just think, connecting with folks that's ready to go and has land, hopefully can get us moving quicker in that direction. So we're not just in the studying phase, but in the action phase. So I would recommend that you reach out to Easter Seals and see what they're doing as it relates. I believe they are tiny homes. I know it is veteran housing that they are working on. Also, I do want to acknowledge the housing for people with disabilities and getting with LAD. I know I just kept on it, but the LAD project is going to be in the county, I believe Colerain Township and Springfield Township. And so I think that's very important, and particularly right now as the president has cut funding for people with disabilities. I never heard of such a thing, that people would cut the people who have disabilities. So they are in a frenzy now of where to live, where to go, and how to survive, as many others are as well. So I wanted to commend you working on that and getting that moving and grooving. When will we have breaking of ground on that project? I know it's Springfield Township and Colerain Township.
Yeah, we're actually getting quite close to sort of the last step before that would start happening. So we've been working through with them this big lift of getting all the pieces together. As I think I might have mentioned before, we actually CDF has loaned LAD a bunch of money that would then be so that we didn't have to disperse the grants up front. All of which is to say that is in work now. I will get back. I will sort of circle back on where the latest projections are on when a actual sort of the groundbreaking for the first phase will be, and let you know. I don't know, as I sit here today. I think because we're still putting the last pieces together on the financing.
Yeah, we need a timeline. And lastly, I just want to say, as we're looking for a permanent funding source and all those kind of things, is that we want to make sure that we are stretching the dollar as long as possible. As stated, we won't have the help of the Biden-Harris administration anymore. May not get any help. And just as fast as they're moving to cut, we have to be as fast as implementing the funding that we have before we start talking about, we need a permanent funding source. Well, did we use the money we already have before we start talking about new money? We've got money still there that you have. And let's get moving on that money before we start talking about some new money. And that's how people kind of do in their own households. I've got money, we're trying to make it work. And, before people say, quit coming at, mom and dad say, don't ask me for some new money and you ain't spent the money we gave you. So I want to get some timelines, I think, piggying back on what's been said by my colleagues today. We've made some progress. We now understand it's very difficult, 40,000 units, and it's going to be even more than 40,000 at some point. But let's get moving on what we have, and let's try to accelerate the pace. The other thing you have on your funding background, you say background funding commitments, and you have a loan category, and you have the city in a loan category through the HUD 108 loan fund. I don't know, I'd have to ask Mr. Ludo, is there any loans instead of just coming to us to get grants? Then on the other side, when you go to the private side, and say we're doing great with the private side, but private is in the loan category. I don't see any foundations. Maybe there are some that you haven't listed, but they're not in the grant category. They're in a loan, and everybody know a loan got to be paid back, sometimes with interest. So they're over in the loan category. And then you have Hamilton County, $36.4 million that we've provided to you in the grant program. You don't have to pay that back. So that's the only thing I saw was, do we need to be moving over in the loan category? And that'd probably be a question for Mr. Ludo when we look at funding in the future, not funding right now. But we may want to go into everybody else is over in the loan area. Maybe we need to be over in the loan area and get some money back with some interest. And then my last thing would ask, and this may not, because you're more on the finance side than I am, and I'd ask you and Mr. Ludo. Should we be taking some of this and putting it in an endowment type of thing so it can possibly sustain for the future? I mean, we gave $36 million and it's out the door. And then you say, I need more. Should we have taken some of this? Well, we put that extra money, which I would question because I said, we're going to give them extra money, but we ain't even finished the projects in the contract. Should that money have gone into an endowment that can continue to sustain? Now, that's a question that you guys can get together, but I'd like to get something back in writing. Should some of this go into an endowment that can continue the programming, or should it all get down to zero? I'm not sure. That's a question that I would have to turn over to Mr. Ludo.
Just, look, if you don't mind, just real quick on the endowment side, and I'd be happy to hear what Luke has to say about how they're approaching some of their other funding sources. But at least for the funding that the county is allocated, I think with an endowment, you allocate funding and it sits, and then a lot of times interest is pulled off it to help fund ongoing needs. I think there would probably be a problem with that from a commitment perspective with our ARPA funding, that it has to be committed and then used by a certain time. And I don't think that the Treasury regulations allow for that money to sit in an endowment. But it's a good thought. Maybe there's some of the other sources of funding that don't have that timing associated with it that could be used in that manner. Also, Commissioner, as you indicated, the 108 loans, that's a way to leverage community development block funds. Historically, we've looked at that, and as we think about the permanent funding solution for this long term, that's certainly one of the ideas that we'll be looking into.
Okay, and that comes from HUD, right?
That is HUD dollars, yes.
So we don't even know we're gonna have
No,
HUD.
that's-
We hope to have it. Okay, well, I just wanted to put those things on the table. And if we use any other funds, because we won't have ARPA anymore, that's over.
Yeah.
I would like to look at just all those things except for us just running with grants, because we won't have the money. So my takeaway for that today is we've got money, we got to move a little quicker. And before I start talking about new money, I got to see that we've completed what was in the contract of delivering. And we got to move quick because, the like you said, the need is very fast. And so I agree with my colleagues on the questions that they have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So it sounds like you have some more homework to do. The one thing, and I didn't mention tiny homes because I knew it would be brought up otherwise, but the one thing you said about tiny homes is not only the funding, but the zoning. And so if they're, or in land, available land. So those are things that we can think about before, the study is concluded as to, how we get this done, what populations are served. So I want to just throw that out there because, again, as I've talked to other folks in different areas that are looking at tiny homes also, or manufactured homes, or, whatever the deviation is, they've run into problems related to available land and zoning. And so I don't want to have that delay anything by way of starting to move on tiny homes. So I just throw that out there as
I would just
things learned.
really add one thing from your earlier comments. County-owned land and the county saying we want to do something with this land is a lever that you guys have to pull. And I think to your earlier comment, it goes along with the idea that they're in an ideal world, the government says every decision we're gonna make in 5 different ways is gonna be about building more housing. So we're gonna do the funding side, but we're also gonna orient our zoning around that. We're also gonna orient the land we control around that. We're also gonna orient our permitting process around that. So all the different pieces you would have influence on, you direct them to focus on that, because otherwise they all focus on their normal stuff, right? And the permitting process is about making sure that everything is built to code, and that's what it should be doing. But if it doesn't have a pressure on it to say, hey, we want to push more housing, or at least that can influence it to move faster or to be clearer, or all sort of different things. That's direction that the government can give that is not about funding. It's about government functions.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. Really
Thank you.
appreciate the time.
Thank you.
All right. Our next presentation is the 911 EMA building update. So there's Bert Watts with County Facilities, and Rika Thacker is the Assistant Director of County Facilities. And I know we also have EMA in the room. Nick Crosley is at a conference. So Morgan Peterson, the Assistant Director of EMA, is here with us today. Thank you for being here as well. Yes. Oh, and Andy Knapp is here. Sorry. EMA, 911, and facilities. So, yes, please lead us in this conversation.
All right. So Rika and me's here just to give you all a brief update on where the project is and where we're heading with it.
Okay.
Do we have a slideshow? Yes, we do. All right. So this is a rendering of the building. It's in the city of Springdale, 41,000 square feet, almost 4 acres. Here's kind of the summary of the overall project. Let's see, we're relocating communications center from their current facility on Civic Center Drive, and EMA is currently in a leased facility at the city of Cincinnati, and we're renovating a facility to get them a new, more efficient area to work in. All right, so here is the project overview, and it's going to go through that.
Which button do I push? The red one?
No, the arrow.
Oh, okay. All right, so our project budget for this was 24.4. I'm a loud person. $24.4 million. We have about $2 million remaining. Currently, we are on schedule and within budget, and expected to be completed at the end of October this year. Some of the site components with their completion dates, we've already completed the 911 system tower. That was done back in 2023. By March and April this year, we should have our new Duke power feed completed along with the storm shelter building. The dumpster and equipment storage building is due to be complete in May, and like I mentioned earlier, the main building should be substantially complete at the end of October. Oh, okay. I'm like, what is this one? So we have a specialized technology due to be installed in September that is very specific to both the EMA and 911 facility that they will be providing that will overlap with our substantial completion to make sure that the technology and cabling is installed appropriately to get them set up. The owner furnished equipment will begin moving in November, and we should start having staff move in towards the end of December and first of 2026. Right now, we are working on interior casework, flooring, painting, and rough-in for the electrical and plumbing. On the exterior, they're working on the storm shelter walls, along with parking lot curb replacements and the rooftop units. And then there's some antenna work that is currently going on too. The picture shown is one of the break areas in the facility, just to give you an idea of the color scheme and finishes that are going in currently. Upcoming, we have a sanitary line that is necessary for the storm shelter. That's due in sometime next week. Then we have the concrete and asphalt work. We are slowly working towards that, making sure that we're not going to disrupt anything new with the overlap of existing work, and so that we are not touching back on it later at date. The storm shelter roof is due in at the end of this month, along with the storefront, and towards the end of the month as well, we'll get our switchgear and emergency generators. Those are our long lead items. Those are due in towards the end of the month. The electrical switchgear is not due till the end of April, but we do have some components to get that operating partially between now and then so that we can keep moving forward with finishes. All of the furniture and workstations are due in towards the end of June, and that will be our big push to complete. Some progress photos we have. We have the dumpster and storage area on the left there, the storm shelter on the right. Sorry for the bad picture on the storm shelter. They had it tented for the cold weather so that they could continue to work. On the left, we have the first floor emergency operations center in progress, and then on the second floor, the 911 dispatch room. The cafe and break room for the first floor is on the left side there, along with the multi-purpose room on the right. Those are both on the first floor of the facility. And then upstairs on the second floor, we've got an activity room being constructed, and then the standard office example for you guys to see as well. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Morgan or Andy if you have anything to say beyond what we just heard about the updates. Thanks for the updates. We're pretty excited about this project.
Probably the only thing I wanted to say is thank you for the support and investment in this project, and then also a thank you to facilities. I know this is the first time I've been involved in a project of this magnitude, and the time that has been put into planning out and making sure this is a tremendous facility for county employees to work and make sure that we can coordinate with all of our partners if there was a disaster is very incredible to be a part of and see happen. So I know I was up there yesterday with Rika, and then our staff has been up there, and just the enthusiasm and excitement that we see, it's really engaged us, and I believe it will help us really engage and support a lot of the partners that we work with, which is a big focus of what we do. So
Great, thank you.
Good morning. This is a great project, and again, I echo the thanks that Morgan offered as well. In that and all of you have seen the building where I'm at now in the 1970s that has served us, quite well. We are very excited to get into this more modern facility. The most impressive thing, to be honest with you, is the space that we'll have right now. Because of the technology, our technology has really overloaded the current radio room and where our operators are working. And I walk around in this new space, and I think I'm going to need roller skates for our supervisors to be able to adequately supervise this is I use the term palatial estate, but it's a very nice. We're not going with a Cadillac, so we are, of course, being fiscally responsible. But it's going to have the technology we need. It's going to have the creature comforts that we absolutely need to attract good quality personnel to work for us and to want to work in this environment. And literally, it's coming together. It's very exciting and very much appreciated. And we'll keep you posted as things progress.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I want to say that I think this board heard loud and clear that we need to recruit and retain good people, both for EMA and for 911, and we were struggling to do that in the facility that you are currently in. We've all been there, and it's just, not only is it not really appropriate for that work, it lacks the technology. And especially, emergency management and 911, I mean, the one thing you do rely on is technology. And so I think that's the really exciting piece of how this is moving forward, and we're going to have up-to-date technology in the facility. So again, pretty excited. Can I ask one thing related to the building itself? These are big rooms, which I think is great, because you have all kinds of space, and especially for 911, when you're taking those kinds of calls right next to somebody else with the earphones on, I think that can be pretty challenging. So when you point out some of these rooms that are not actually workspaces, but rather the activity room and the standard office, what is going to happen in those spaces?
So the standard offices are self-explanatory. Most of the staff that, would you say, administrative?
It'd be the administrative staff
Yeah.
that are responsible for the management, the oversight of the operation. We'll go into the standard offices.
And then there'll be some workstations outside of that for other supervisors within dispatch space. I can't speak so much on the EMA side. I've not seen how they operate. And then the activity room will have kind of cool down abilities for the staff for when things get stressful, when they need to take a break and just decompress a little bit.
I think a lot of people are familiar with the job of our air traffic controllers. And in a very similar way, you just need some downtime. You take a very high profile call that's very emotionally charged and where lives are at stake, and you just need a minute to decompress. So my vision of that is to have some light exercise equipment, just something to kind of get the stress out of your body, a ping pong table, something that the folks can interact with each other and just relax for a minute and before going right back into that high stress environment. And so that's our goal. In addition to that, there's a series of several quiet rooms. One of the things that we don't have right now is you take a very emotionally charged call, and you're the type of person that just give me 5 minutes of peace. I think any one of us that are parents can certainly appreciate that. Just give me my 5 minutes, and so we now have a series of several rooms that will just be quiet rooms that'll have a comfortable seating area, a comfortable a table to set a drink on. No technology. We have rooms where we will have technology where people can watch a television show or watch a movie or something on their break time. Keeping in mind, our 911 operators and dispatchers work a 12-hour shift. So they're at work for 12 hours, and they have designated breaks along with a 45-minute lunch. So they have a nice, quiet, comfortable area that they can move to. But we also have those individual quiet areas as well as a mother room. One of the things that we don't have in our current facility is a way for new mothers to be able to take care of the things that new mothers need to do. And so we're accommodating them in this building. And so again, one of the areas that we're really excited to have is that offering as an employer of, high level, the comfortable surroundings that will help minimize the impact of the stress on your body as you're operating in this environment.
Thank you. Commissioner Summer-Dumas.
Thank you for your presentation. I was wondering about the developer, because this building looks similar to the coroner's building. Is this the same? Who's the developer on this project? Do you know?
KZF is the architect, and Monarch Construction is responsible for the construction.
Monarch. Okay.
I'm not familiar directly with.
It's Monarch.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Just a few questions about the floor plan, just being inquisitive about it. But is 911 on one floor and EMA is on the other floor?
Yeah, so EMA is on the first floor,
Okay.
and then the communication center is up on the second floor. We have some shared environments, so we have a very large cafe, so that rather than duplicating kitchens, again, in the interest of being fiscally responsible, we tried to maximize the ability to share certain types of resources. So there are shared spaces where it's appropriate, and then each of us have our own individual break areas, for example. But yes, EMA will be on the first floor, and then communication center on the second floor.
Very good. Is there a basement in the building?
There is no basement. It's a slab concrete floor.
That's unusual, because they always say if you have a house, you should have a basement to be able to go there, and so you just got. Well, anyway, it's too late for that now. But
No, but to your point, as far as we were rehabbing an existing building, so this it was an office complex that was already established, and we were just rehabbing the guts of it, if you will, which is exactly why Springdale required us to build a storm shelter adjacent to it, so that we have the ability to protect our employees. Obviously, the 911 staff, we're on duty 24/7, and if in the hopefully unlikely event that a tornado would be headed towards us, they need a safe space to go to protect themselves. This building doesn't have that basement, so a compromise to that is that storm shelter that's adjacent to the building.
Okay, I didn't hear about the storm shelter. I think you mentioned it the last time you came or something, so that's great.
It might be helpful to have EMA's perspective on that as well. The emergency management. Yeah.
Director Knapp spoke on it very well, but it's really being built, and you could see in a couple of the pictures while it was covered with tarps, it is going to be a very sturdy building that's built similar to a concrete basement, where it has a lot of extra support and infrastructure, and that's where anyone in the building could go if there was some shelter that was needed, especially in the case of a tornado warning. And it was made very close to the building. That would be a very short time period. So as soon as we have advance notice, everyone could.
Great, fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Reese.
That was a good question.
No, I just get another question.
I said that was a good.
She had a good question.
No, I just wanted to say thank you for the update, and like was said earlier, I think that was like my Director Knapp made sure I came out there to see the facility, but these are folks that are on the front lines of life and death situations, and particularly with 911, dealing with the public and the needs, and sometimes it ends in loss of life or a baby being delivered. And that is a tremendous amount of stress and pressure. Talk about being in the pressure cooker. So I really do support the fact that it doesn't need to look drab. It doesn't need to look, down. It needs to have an opportunity for them to take a break, whatever they need in order to get their mind reset, because they're dealing with the public. So I have no problem with the break rooms, the quiet rooms, having a chance to, because that's the life that we live now. People, they might get on their phone and play the little games on there to try to reset themselves, or like you said, ping pong, what have you. I do not see that as frivolous if it's going to allow us to hire and retain the best people, and then have their minds clear to deal with, because they don't deal with just one phone call. It's a lot, and it's a lot. I could only imagine the amount of pressure, because when people in Hamilton County and wherever, what do they say? Call 911. And I want to make sure that person is not overstressed, and, we got to have them not ready to break, right? So I think this building allows that. I'm glad you have that in your floor plan, and will allow them to have a time to step away and recuperate the best way that the way they do it. Everybody has a different. We are supporters of mental health here as a board, and we want mental health also for our workers as well. So I just wanted to say I'm glad to see that was a part of it. So.
All right, thank you. And I do want to applaud it sounds like lactation rooms or something similar to it. So very cutting edge. Thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it. Thanks to you also, Bert. I know you're tucked away back there. Thanks for the perspective. Thanks for the update. Appreciate it. We'll look forward to the ribbon cutting, I guess it is. Yeah. Yeah. All right. We've got our last public item is the Home ARP Supportive Services Funding Recommendations. We've got Katie Valley, Senior Program Manager, here to talk us through this. Welcome.
Thank you again, Commissioners. As you mentioned, my name is Katie Valley, and I'm a Senior Program Manager in the Community Development Division. And today I am sharing the Home ARP Supportive Services Funding Recommendations as provided by the Community Development Advisory Committee. So as a brief reminder, the American Rescue Plan Act was signed into law in March 2021 with $5 billion appropriated to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to create the Home ARP program. Hamilton County received approximately $5.4 million in Home ARP funding, which was programmed via our allocation plan as approved by the board in March 2023. As part of the county's allocation plan, the board authorized $1 million to provide a broad range of supportive services to qualifying households, which the Community Development Division is now managing in 2 competitive RFPs. The recommendations being shared today are part of the first Supportive Services RFP. Supportive services are limited to certain eligible services and costs, which I'll cover briefly in the next couple slides. So overall, Home ARP aims to reduce homelessness and increase housing stability. Under Home ARP, there are 3 categories that are specifically included as supportive services. The first category includes McKinney-Vento supportive services, which provide supportive services to individuals and families experiencing homelessness. These are adapted from the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. The second category includes homelessness prevention services, which are adapted from certain eligible services under the Emergency Services Grant regulations. And the final category of eligible supportive services includes housing counseling services. So the eligible services and costs for the supportive services are adapted from the McKinney-Vento Act, as well as the Code of Federal Regulations. Both the McKinney-Vento supportive services and the homelessness prevention services could include eligible costs such as childcare, improving basic educational skills, establishing or operating employment assistance and job training programs, providing meals or groceries, certain legal services, teaching critical life management skills, or financial assistance. Regarding housing counseling services, only HUD-certified housing counselors or organizations can provide eligible services, such as staff salaries and overhead, development of a housing counseling work plan, marketing and outreach, intake, financial and housing affordability analysis, action plans, or follow-up communications with clients. As mentioned earlier, this is the first of 2 competitive RFPs to award funding for a broad range of supportive services to qualifying households. This first RFP was released in September 2024, with proposals due in November. Staff from the Community Development Division met to score objective points for each applicant, and the Community Development Advisory Committee, known as CDAC, met to review and score applications using discretionary points, all according to our scoring criteria. Ultimately, CDAC made funding recommendations based on the highest scoring applicants. This RFP has $500,000 in available funding, and we received a total request amount of $1.5 million. We received a total of 11 applications, 5 of which are recommended for funding by CDAC. These recommendations would award funding to 45% of the total applicants received. Additionally, there will be another RFP for Home ARP supportive services with an additional $500,000 available in competitive funding. The second and final RFP is estimated to be released later this fall. As outlined here, CDAC has recommended funding to support the following organizations. The YWCA received an average score of 92 and were recommended to receive $100,000 to support the Hamilton County Domestic Violence Shelter for those experiencing family and domestic violence. Catholic Charities of Southwestern Ohio received an average score of 88 and were recommended to receive $75,000 for refugee resettlement services to meet the necessity of initial housing. And we're currently working with administration to further vet Catholic Charities' ability to complete their proposed work in light of recent executive orders and subsequent court filings, and would like to hold this recommendation until further review is complete, after which we'll update the board. Bethany House Services received an average score of 87 and were recommended to receive $200,000 for their shelter diversion program that aims to help families find a new home, offer up to 6 months of rental assistance, and provide management services. Found House received an average score of 87 and were recommended to receive $100,000 for their emergency shelter program for case management to reestablish stable housing, as well as their aftercare program for temporary assistance during a crisis that jeopardizes housing. And finally, Cincy Smiles Foundation received an average score of 83 and were recommended to receive $25,000 for their Victims of Violence dental treatment program to address oral trauma. CDAC's funding recommendations can be visualized with this chart, with 18% of funding supporting the Hamilton County Domestic Violence Shelter, 14% towards refugee resettlement, 36% towards shelter diversion, 27% towards emergency shelter and aftercare, and 5% to support violence victims' medical support. This table includes applications that were ultimately not recommended for funding by CDAC based on their respective scores. The Community Development Division will provide supportive next steps to all applicants who are not approved to receive funding from this RFP. Specifically, we'll provide technical assistance to applicants that were not funded to discuss how applications can be improved for the second Supportive Services RFP, which will be held later this year. And as mentioned previously, this second and final round of funding for Home ARP Supportive Services will have an additional $500,000 available for competitive applications. So at this time, there's no legislative action necessary by the board. However, whenever contracts with each awarded agency are moved forward, that will require board action. Thank you again for your time, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. I've got a couple of questions. So one very high-level question. The Hamilton County allocation plan is over $5 million. This is $1 million of that $5. What is going on with the remainder?
So the remainder, we have $400,000 toward the acquisition and development of non-congregate shelters. We have $3.3 million toward the development of affordable rental housing. We have $273,000 toward nonprofit operating, and the remaining toward administration and planning.
Okay. It might be helpful in the future
Sure.
to include that, since this very high number, it's like, oh, wait a minute, 4 million is not on the chart. Let's dig down a little bit. So thank you for that information. My other question is related to the folks that were not funded. Philosophically, and you sit in the CDAC meetings, I assume, so you would know kind of the approach here. If an organization receives funding in the first round, are they more or less likely to receive funding in the second round? And I'm asking the question because there are agencies here that were not funded, that we have funded in the past, that we all are familiar with, these very good organizations. And so as you think through the second round, and I know you're talking to these organizations about why they weren't funded and how to improve their score, but do they then get viewed differently in the second round, or might it be that the organizations that got funded in the first round, it's kind of a clean slate, and then you just go about it in a way where it's irrelevant whether or not they receive money in the first round related to the second round?
I would say there would definitely be technical assistance conversations to discuss the different scoring criteria and how they scored versus how they could increase their scoring with the objective criteria as well as the subjective. So those conversations would definitely take place to ensure that they understand where their points could have been higher. I think there are examples of better leveraging your funds or demonstrating experience and readiness that may lend itself to getting higher scores. So it would be considered more of a clean slate in the second round of funding.
Okay. It's so curious to me because these organizations, we have awarded them dollars in the past, and I assume they're pretty adept at applying for these dollars. So I'm intrigued by this idea that they didn't meet some technical assistance criteria and therefore, didn't score as high as some of the other organizations. Just think that's curious. All right, I've got another question, but I'm going to hold it. So Commissioner Sorono-Dumas?
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. So the criteria that you are looking at is specifically what HUD sent you as a criteria, or did we add some on for ourselves in planning?
If we can go back to the PowerPoint for a second, I can show you.
Well, I see all those.
Oh, okay, you can see.
Yeah, but is that HUD's criteria, or did we add anything on to it?
These are added criteria.
Okay. Oh, they are added by whom? By planning?
By community development.
Okay. Why did I say plan? It is very unusual. I was listening to Commissioner Driehaus, which I'm not upset about it because the ones that were not approved normally get most of the funding. So I'm not happy about it, but I'm not sad either. But I'm looking at on the first page, it says, or the second page, three categories specifically included as supportive services. So you had 3 categories, and then when you go to the next page, you only had 2. I think you combined prevention with the support services. Okay, that's what happened. Okay. Can I get I see these criteria here, but I'd like to know what HUD's criteria is. Can I get that? That would be great. Thanks. That's all I had.
Very good. And since Commissioner Reese isn't here right now, I'm going to take her question. I'm going to take her. I'm going to take her time. So I was intrigued by this, the Cincy Smiles. It's not that I don't support it, but so for victims of domestic violence and oral trauma, something I'm not familiar with. Do you know more about that?
In their proposal, they were stating that their professionals would be able to identify potential outcomes of domestic violence based on oral examinations. So they are proposing that during regular examinations that their professionals who could potentially identify such circumstances would work with clients and case managers to provide further services if that individual were willing to do so, to help move forward from a place of potential domestic violence.
Okay, I've just never heard of that before. Okay, all right, very good. Thank you for your presentation. Commissioner, any further questions?
Nothing.
Okay, all right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. All right, the last thing on our agenda is an executive session, and I'm going to move that we go into executive session pursuant to RC Section 121.22G3 to conduct a conference with an attorney for the public body concerning imminent litigation.
Second.
Yes.
Commissioner Summer Dumas.
Yes.